Picture this. A lone lieutenant walking slowly towards the enemy lines.
Okay.
His only shield, a white flag. And it's clumsily fashioned from, like, a bath towel.
Wow. Just a towel.
Yeah.
Mm.
He's headed towards German positions, hoping to negotiate a surrender. That image, it's from John Steinbeck's Once There Was a War.
Yeah.
And it really grabs you, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. That focus on the individual experience within this huge, immense scale of war.
Yeah.
That's what makes Steinbeck's reporting so powerful, I think.
Right.
It's easy to get lost in the big picture, the grand strategies and battles, but Steinbeck, he consistently brings us back down to the human level.
So the ordinary soldier, the civilian.
It's exactly, their experiences.
And that's exactly what this deep dive is all about. This actually comes straight from a listener request, which is great. We're diving deep into Steinbeck's dispatches from World War II, but we're not just, rehashing the familiar history. Our aim is really to uncover those human stories, those often missed unusual details that maybe don't make it into the official accounts.
Yeah, the stuff between the lines.
Exactly. And it's important to remember, of course, that he was writing under wartime censorship.
Yeah.
And, the whole pervasive influence of the war effort, that definitely shaped what he reported and how.
That's such a crucial point. You have to keep that context in mind. The war effort had its own story to tell, its own narrative.
Yeah.
And, well, deviations weren't exactly encouraged, so Steinbeck and other correspondents, too, they were constantly navigating those constraints.
Right. So to give you a sense of where we're headed in this deep dive, we're basically going to follow Steinbeck chronologically.
Yeah.
Starting in England.
Okay.
Then we'll move on to Africa. He was often staging there. And then finally into Italy.
Got it.
And we'll be highlighting recurring themes, those surprising little moments, and really trying to get a feel for what life was like for ordinary people, soldiers and civilians during this huge conflict, beyond the standard history books.
Sounds good. England first, then. It was such a fascinating place during that time, wasn't it? A real mix.
A total mix. Everyday life just carrying on alongside these incredible pressures of wartime. Steinbeck captures some really evocative moments there.
He really does.
He kicks off with this incredibly vivid scene. Soldiers boarding a troop ship in the evening. He describes them just sitting on their gear on the dock, and the blackout lights are casting these long shadows. And he really emphasizes how their helmets make them look so uniform, almost anonymous,
Right, losing their individuality in the gear.
Totally. And he also notes the mix of rifles they carried, older Springfields and Enfields right alongside the newer M1s and carbines. That little detail, it immediately gives you a sense of the scale, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The sheer scale of mobilization, pulling everything they had off the shelves, basically.
Yeah.
And that anonymity you mentioned, created by the uniforms and equipment, it really speaks to how war can just submerge individual identity into the collective. It has to, in a way.
Then he takes us inside the ship itself. He paints this picture. Half the men sleeping out on the open decks.
Wow, open decks.
Yeah. And the other half crammed into what used to be ballrooms and dining rooms. Imagine that.
That's quite an image. The echoes of luxury gone.
Totally gone.
Yeah.
Just basic survival. He mentions they'd shift sleeping arrangements every night, and they wouldn't even properly undress until they reached wherever they were going. This was clearly no pleasure cruise.
Definitely not.
And even for those trying to sleep on those dim decks, there was the constant threat of submarine attack. Steinbeck notes that, beneath any sort of outward nonchalance, that danger was always lurking, always in the back of their minds.
The troop ship becomes this temporary, self-contained little world, doesn't it? But under constant threat, the lack of privacy, the danger, it must have forced some intense bonds between those men, even if they were short-lived.
Oh, absolutely. And the rumors. He dedicates a whole section just to the rumors, these wild stories that would just spread like wildfire on the ships.
Oh, I bet. What kind of stuff?
Everything. Supposed U-boat sightings, planned enemy interceptions, even rumors of, secret epidemics being covered up by the officers.
Paranoia central.
Totally. He observed how these stories would just escalate as the days passed and the men got more anxious. What do you think fuels that kind of thing in such an environment?
Well, in situations with high stress, high uncertainty, and maybe not a lot of reliable information, the human mind tries to fill the gaps, right?
Yeah.
Rumors can be a way to process anxiety, to try and make sense of the unknown, even if the explanations are, well, pretty far-fetched. It's like a form of collective sense-making, however shaky it might be.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
He then shifts his focus a bit to a small USO unit that was on board.
Okay.
And these weren't the big Hollywood stars, just ordinary singers, dancers, magicians. trying to entertain this really diverse group of exhausted soldiers with pretty limited resources.
Tough gig.
Yeah, and he makes this really interesting point. There was no real war song for this war yet. Instead, the requests were all for old favorites, like Harvest Moon or Home on the Range.
Huh. Nostalgia.
Right. That absence of a unifying musical anthem for their current struggle,
Yeah.
that seems kind of significant, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The lack of a big adopted war song might reflect the complexity, maybe the more ambiguous nature of this global conflict compared to earlier wars that had clearer sort of musical rallying cries.
Yeah, maybe.
Perhaps the anxieties, the sheer scale of it all, it just didn't lend itself to easy glorification in song, at least not in that early stage.
Good point. He then describes their arrival. In harbor, surrounded by other ships, naval activity everywhere, and from their smaller transport, the men could see the bombed-out buildings, the piles of rubble.
The reality hits.
Exactly. Steinbeck says, they'd seen pictures, read the news, but witnessing the devastation firsthand, that was completely different. The reality hitting home, like you said, much more powerfully.
I can imagine.
And right there on the quayside, he notes the tireless Red Cross workers, waiting with coffee and what looked like mountains of cake, just offering this immediate, tangible support.
That juxtaposition. The Red Cross providing comfort, sustenance right against the backdrop of all that destruction.
Yeah.
It really highlights the immediate human cost of the war, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The Red Cross becomes like a symbol of welcome, but also of the stark reality waiting for these soldiers.
Okay, so moving on from the troop ship, Steinbeck takes us to a bomber station in England.
Right, the air war.
Yeah. He paints this picture of the airmen coming back from leave in London, and he points out the stark contrast between, like, the ancient charm of the nearby town and the purely functional modern feel of the bomber base itself.
Two different worlds side by side.
Totally.
Yeah.
Inside the barracks, he observes the almost identical pinup girls stuck up by each neatly made bunk.
Huh. Little piece of home, I guess. Or fantasy.
Right. And he notes the almost casual way the airmen would talk about incredibly dangerous missions. Places like Kiel, the constant threat of flak.
Flak, anti-aircraft fire, for anyone unfamiliar.
Right. And that casual talk, it's striking.
Those pinups, though, they offer a little glimpse into the personal lives, the connections these guys had back home. A reminder, maybe, of what they were fighting for. And that matter-of-fact way of discussing danger, it's a common psychological defense, isn't it? When you're facing constant peril. It's a way of normalizing the extreme. Trying to. Anyway.
He touches on that, too. The airmen's concern that the public back home, they might not really get the reality of the war they were fighting.
Yeah, the gap between the front line and the home front.
And their reluctance to be seen as, like, overly heroic. He also notes how, as they got closer to actual combat, their interest in news from home seemed to fade.
Detachment setting in.
It's like their world just narrowed, narrowed down to the immediate dangers, the bonds they shared with their crew.
That makes sense. That detachment reflects a shift in priorities. When survival is suddenly front and center, the broader concerns, they tend to fade into the background. Their immediate reality becomes everything. The shared experience, the shared danger within their unit.
Then there's this fascinating section on superstition in the barracks.
Ah, yes. Always happens under stress.
He describes this palpable tension. Nerves constantly frayed, sleep hard to come by. And he shares these anecdotes. Presentiments that seem to come true.
Like what?
Like the radio man who meticulously organized all his belongings the morning he was shot down. Or the tail gunner desperately searching for his lucky medallion just before a mission.
Oh, man. Those little rituals.
Exactly. He even describes this moment where everyone just starts cursing a new arrival who stumbled and made noise in the dark barracks. And it sounds awful, but Steinbeck suggests it actually acted as this weird release of pent-up tension for everyone.
Wow. What do those kinds of superstitions tell us, do you think, about their mental state? Well, in these high-stakes, unpredictable situations like aerial combat, where individuals have, let's face it, very limited control, superstition often pops up. It's a way to try and create some sense of order, some influence over events.
Right, a sense of control.
Even if it's illusory. These rituals, the lucky charms, they can provide real psychological comfort, a feeling of agency when you're facing overwhelming danger.
He even connects this to the physical effects of high-altitude bombing. The lack of oxygen, the sensory distortions.
Oh, sexy, yeah.
He explains how it's maybe not surprising that they might sometimes see things that weren't really there.
Yeah.
He even mentions gunners firing on their own planes in confusion sometimes.
Jeez.
It really highlights the extreme disorienting conditions they were operating under.
That physiological impact of high altitude is absolutely critical here. Reduced oxygen levels, they do impair cognitive function, sensory perception. It makes those seemingly irrational superstitions, those misperceptions, almost understandable within that extreme context.
Yeah, totally. Steinbeck then vividly details the run-up to a bombing raid, the abrupt awakening, the pre-dawn briefing.
What serious parts?
Yeah. Star's bright lights, the sharp, efficient voice of the briefing officer, aerial photos projected onto a screen, the matter-of-fact delivery of their target info. Very clinical. But then he contrasts this clinical atmosphere with the palpable anxiety of the ground crew waiting below, their deep bond with the airmen. And he mentions one Master Sergeant Pierce who had this unwavering faith in their bomber, nicknamed Mary Ruth.
Ah, that's touching, the ground crew's connection.
It really is. That stark contrast between the detached briefing and the deep emotional investment of the ground crew really underscores the different roles, the different perspectives within the war effort.
Absolutely. The ground crew's faith in the plane, it becomes a symbol of their hope, doesn't it? Hope for the safe return of their friends.
And then there's that haunting story a crew shared the night before about witnessing a fortress bomber just slowly falling from the sky.
Oh, God.
A truly unforgettable image, he says. The plane climbing almost vertically, then just slipping, like a leaf falling. The crew bailing out, parachutes opening, and then the final silent explosion way down below.
Jeez, that's brutal.
It serves as such a stark reminder, doesn't it? The inherent fragility of life in aerial combat.
That detailed account, it just cuts through any potential romanticism about air warfare. It brings the harsh reality of loss right into sharp focus, a visceral reminder of the dangers these guys faced every single time they took off.
Okay, shifting gears a bit now, but still in England. Steinbeck introduces us to this rather unusual setup, a mixed-gender coast battery.
Oh, right. I remember reading about this. Fascinating.
Yeah. Women were doing virtually everything. Spotting enemy aircraft, plotting their positions, sighting the targets.
Really, everything except?
Except the actual physical loading and aiming of the really heavy guns. That was still done by the men. But he emphasizes their almost machine-like efficiency and the genuine respect they earn from their male colleagues.
That's great to hear.
The commanding officer is clearly incredibly proud of his unit, and he just dismisses any, outdated concerns about the morals of women in combat roles. It's a really interesting snapshot of changing gender roles during the war.
It really is. This integrated battery is such a powerful example of how wartime necessity could challenge and sometimes break down traditional gender roles in the military.
Definitely.
It highlights the crucial and often underappreciated contributions women made to the war effort in all sorts of dangerous roles.
And then he shares this almost surreal little detail. The women returning from their duty shift, still smelling of cordite from firing the guns,
Wow.
and then going off to the local cinema to watch a Hollywood war film.
Oh, the irony.
Right.
Yeah.
That juxtaposition of their lived, gritty reality with the often sanitized, dramatized version on screen, it's quite telling, isn't it?
It really brings their reality into sharp contrast with the popular perception of war. It underscores that disconnect between the lived experience and how it's portrayed in mass media.
Okay, we absolutely cannot forget Wing Commander William Goat,
Ah, yes. The alcoholic mascot.
the rather remarkable mascot of an RAF wing. This is such a wonderfully strange story. He apparently had rank.
A goat with rank.
Yeah. And even decorations painted on his horns, and it was considered good luck to give him a stroke before going on operations.
Of course it was.
But his one true weakness, beer,
Naturally.
which would make him quite tipsy and prone to hilariously sneering at everyone from the American Army Air Force right up to Winston Churchill, apparently.
Sneering at Churchill. That's brave.
And incredibly, there were even actual plans for him to be buried with full military honors.
You're kidding. For the goat.
Nope, full military honors. What do you make of these kinds of wartime mascots? They pop up quite a bit.
Well, I think in the face of the immense pressures, the anxieties of war, these seemingly absurd figures like a drunken goat mascot, they can actually serve a really vital psychological purpose.
Like comic relief.
Exactly. They offer a touch of levity, a shared point of affection, maybe even a sense of good luck in a profoundly uncertain world. The goat becomes a symbol of morale, doesn't he? A bit of welcome absurdity in a very, very serious situation.
That makes sense. Steinbeck also gives us these brief but incredibly vivid snapshots of Londoners during the Blitz.
The civilian side.
Yeah, Just little images like seeing 5 fireplaces still standing, completely intact, amidst the rubble after a building was destroyed.
Wow, eerie.
Or the poignant detail of finding a dead sparrow in a gutter after a bombing raid. And he mentions an ambulance driver's visceral, angry reaction to someone committing suicide during an air raid.
God, the layers of tragedy.
These small, almost fleeting observations, they paint such a powerful picture of the devastation and the profound emotional toll on the civilian population.
Those seemingly minor details are often the most impactful, aren't they? In conveying the human experience of war, they offer a visceral sense of the physical destruction and the psychological strain people were under, living under constant threat.
And then there's the completely unexpected saga of Lily Marlene,
Ah, yes. The song that crossed enemy lines.
the German song that, totally against the odds, became hugely popular with soldiers on both sides,
Yeah.
Axis and Allied.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
Totally bizarre. He describes its simple, kind of melancholic lyrics, how it was initially rejected by the German
Maybe
authorities.
they rejected it.
Yeah, but then it got picked up and became the signature song for the singer Lala Anderson and a huge favorite of Rommel's Afrika Korps.
Okay.
But then it spread to the British Eighth Army. Despite, initial official reluctance to embrace an enemy tune.
How did that happen?
Just listening to the broadcasts, apparently. It's a truly fascinating example of how culture can just transcend the boundaries of conflict sometimes.
Yeah.
What do you think it was about that particular song that resonated so universally?
It's likely the themes, right? The song's themes of longing for a loved one, a sense of home that probably resonated deeply with soldiers on both sides.
Yeah, that basic human feeling.
Exactly. Despite being enemies, they shared that fundamental human experience of separation, the desire for peace, for connection, the simple melody, the relatable lyrics. They probably just cut through all the propaganda, all the animosity of war.
Yeah, that makes sense. Finally, while still in England, Steinbeck discusses the surprising prevalence of vegetable gardens
Vegetable gardens, where?
at American airfields and troop barracks.
No way.
Yeah.
Huh.
The soldiers apparently had this real craving for things like green corn, tomatoes, peppers, stuff that didn't thrive so easily in the English climate.
Trying to grow a taste of home.
Exactly. He emphasizes the significant morale boost these gardens provided, a small piece of home in a foreign land. And he even suggests it was kind of a subtle act of rebellion against the perceived blandness of English cooking at the time.
Culinary revolt.
Pretty much.
Mm.
These gardens, they represent so much more than just fresh food, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. They provided a tangible connection to home, a sense of normalcy in a totally chaotic environment. It was a way for these soldiers to exert some control, maybe, over their surroundings, to nurture something positive amidst all the destruction.
And he connects this seemingly small act of gardening to the soldiers' deeper anxieties, worries about the post-war world, fears of unemployment, a return to economic hardship like the Depression. He says they didn't really trust in vague promises of, like, a golden future made of words.
Skeptical.
Yeah. Instead, they yearned for tangible freedoms, the security of their farms back home, the certainty of jobs waiting for them. It's a really powerful insight into their underlying motivations, their worries about what came next.
That connection between the simple act of gardening and those bigger anxieties about the future, that's very insightful. It shows how their immediate experiences and their memories of past hardship really shape their hopes and fears for the post-war world.
Okay, let's cross the Mediterranean now. We're heading towards Italy, but Steinbeck starts this section with American troops in North Africa.
Right, the staging ground.
Exactly. They're going through rehearsals for the invasion of Italy. He describes the rather crude wooden landing barges they were using.
Plywood Navy precursors.
Sort of. And the intense emphasis on landing in Delos, getting off those boats as fast as humanly possible.
Yeah, crucial for amphibious assaults.
He also notes the generally negative attitudes of the soldiers towards the local Arab population there, and the strict restrictions placed upon them.
Yeah, that's an uncomfortable aspect.
It is. But there's this constant sense of practice, 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 and the secret buildup of war materials in the harbors, everything pointing towards the big invasion.
That period of rehearsal highlights the immense logistical planning, the preparation needed for these huge amphibious assaults. The negative portrayal of the locals, though, Unfortunately, it does reflect some of the prevalent attitudes and prejudices of the time, even as they were, preparing to fight for liberation elsewhere.
Yeah, it's a difficult contradiction. And then he really focuses in on the night before the assault.
Ah, the waiting. The hardest part, maybe.
He describes this incredibly introspective, heavy mood that just settled over the soldiers. He talks about the strange, almost searching looks they exchanged, the weight of unspoken feelings, and many unwritten letters that held words they just couldn't bring themselves to say aloud. It's a truly poignant, emotionally charged scene he paints.
That night before a major battle, it's always a moment of profound emotional intensity, isn't it? The soldiers are facing the ultimate unknown, and Steinbeck just beautifully captures that mixture of fear, anticipation, and that deep, unspoken camaraderie binding them together.
He then describes the actual landing at Salerno, and he deliberately contrasts what he likely witnessed, the chaos, the dust, the shell bursts.
The reality.
Yeah, the reality, contrasting it with the often sanitized, impersonal language you'd find in official reports.
Right. Big difference.
And he includes these incredibly specific, heartbreaking details. A young Italian girl killed by a shell, an American soldier just openly weeping over a dead body.
Oh, God.
The pathetic sight of dead mules everywhere, the scattered wreckage of civilian life. He paints a very raw, very unromantic picture of the invasion.
That stark contrast between the likely reality Steinbeck saw and the often distanced language of official accounts. It really underscores the crucial role of frontline reporting, doesn't it? In conveying the true human cost, the brutal realities of war.
He also mentions the command ship. It's functioning as this vital but incredibly vulnerable floating radio station, constantly under threat.
The nerve center, a
Yes.
prime target.
Yeah. And the exhausted officers just waiting for their turn to finally go ashore. And then this haunting image she captures. Discarded equipment, personal belongings, just litter, already beginning to spread out into the sea.
That image of the litter spreading out to sea, it's like a grim premonition, isn't it, of the environmental cost, the sheer waste of such widespread conflict.
Next, we find ourselves off the coast of Sicily. We're aboard a PT boat, slicing through the calm blue water.
Okay.
The captain shares this rather chilling reflection about the profound loneliness of seeing a dead body just floating out there at sea, a thought that clearly stayed with him.
I can only imagine. That's haunting.
Then he recounts a patrol after Palermo had fallen, describing the eerie silence of the wrecked city and the palpable fear he and his first officer felt as darkness started to fall on those deserted streets.
The quiet after the storm can be just as unsettling.
Yeah. Even one of the crew members, a guy nicknamed Bugs, was visibly saddened by the damage he saw inflicted on something he'd hoped to take as a souvenir.
That patrol through the deserted city after the fighting stopped, it captures that unsettling aftermath of conflict, the silence, the emptiness, that can be just as powerful, just as disturbing as the sounds of battle itself.
Steinbeck then vividly describes the welcome the troops received from the Italian people, often overwhelming welcomes.
Liberation.
Yeah. Spontaneous applause, heartfelt embraces, kisses, people throwing fruit and vegetables enthusiastically.
They're going vegetables.
Yeah. He even shares this slightly comical anecdote of a naval officer being nearly knocked unconscious by a shower of amaryllis flowers thrown from a balcony.
Aha, flowers as weapons.
It really conveys this incredible outpouring of emotion from the Italian populace. What do you think was behind that intense reaction? Relief, gratitude.
Probably a complex mix of all those things. Relief that the fighting was ending in their area, gratitude towards the liberating forces, and perhaps just a deep yearning for a return to some kind of normalcy after years of war and fascist rule.
A release.
Exactly, a powerful emotional release.
However, he also makes sure to note the somewhat unsettling presence of well-fed former fascist officials still hanging around the area.
Not everyone got the memo, huh?
It's a stark reminder, isn't it,
That-
to the transition of power, the underlying social structures. They weren't necessarily being completely overturned overnight.
That detail adds a really crucial layer of nuance to the whole narrative of liberation. It suggests the process of change wasn't always clean or clear-cut. Elements of the old regime could definitely still linger.
Then there's this truly charming little story about an Englishwoman who was discovered on the island of Capri after its capture.
Oh yeah, what's her story?
Steinbeck recounts her almost desperate eagerness just to speak English again, her resilience during the German occupation, and this really heartwarming exchange she had with some sailors about finally receiving a long-delayed letter from Australia.
Oh, that's lovely.
It's just a small moment, but such a lovely instance of human connection amidst the broader conflict.
That encounter on Capri provides such a personal, intimate glimpse into the lives of those who'd endured the occupation and their profound longing for connection to the outside world, just a sense of normalcy again.
Steinbeck then uses a lieutenant commander he talks to draw this rather creative analogy between naval warfare and chamber music.
Chamber music, how does that work?
He assigns different musical instruments to the various calibers of guns on a ship, like the 5-inchers are violas, the 40 millimeters are clarinets.
Huh, that's inventive.
It is. He also describes the sheer scale of the storage grounds for war materials along the North African coast, just an almost unimaginable accumulation of the tools of destruction.
The musical analogy is an interesting way to illustrate the complex coordination, the precision involved in naval combat. And the description of those vast supply depots, it really underscores the immense logistical effort needed to sustain a war of this magnitude. Mind-boggling, really.
We then meet Luigi. He's a bartender on Capri.
Luigi the bartender, okay.
And his fondness for Americans is based, at least partly, on past generous tips.
Fair enough.
But his main concern right now is for his daughter and his unborn grandchild back on the mainland in Castellamare. They're directly threatened by the advancing German forces.
Oh no, that's awful.
Yeah. And a lieutenant comes up with this rather impulsive idea to use some captured Italian MS boats, were basically small, fast motor torpedo boats to try and help Luigi's family.
Wow, go rogue for Luigi.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Commodore's initial reaction is amused, but then he ultimately sees the strategic potential in using these captured boats. It's a fascinating blend of, human empathy and cold military pragmatism.
Luigi's personal worry provides such a relatable human stake in the larger conflict. And the lieutenant's idea may be a bit impulsive, but it highlights that desire individuals have to make a direct positive impact on the lives of people caught up in the war.
There's a really thought-provoking section Steinbeck titles, "The Camera Makes Soldiers."
Ooh, interesting. What's the idea?
He reflects on how people consciously presented themselves when they knew they were being photographed, how the camera changed behavior.
Ah, the observer effect.
Exactly. He shares this somewhat humorous anecdote of some Arab laborers striking these very noble, very dignified poses for the camera.
Playing to the lens.
Yeah. But then he powerfully contrasts this with the deeply moving reaction of wounded soldiers on a hospital ship. They wouldn't pose. They would just simply smile or maybe nod at the camera, seemingly trying to reassure their loved ones back home that they were okay.
Oh, wow. That's powerful.
It really is. That observation about the camera's influence, it highlights the performative aspect of identity, doesn't it? Especially in wartime. And the wounded soldiers' understated reactions. They speak volumes about their desire to protect their families from more worry. He then recounts this almost unbelievable story about the elf at the Aleti Hotel in Algiers.
An elf? Seriously?
Apparently, an event supposedly witnessed by numerous war correspondents, this British consul inadvertently ends up hosting a huge number of journalists.
Okay.
And then these inexplicable things start happening.
Yeah.
Appearances of snow, indoors, Canadian ale mysteriously materializing.
Snow ale? How?
Nobody knows.
Yeah.
It's this bizarre, almost magical occurrence right amidst the often grim realities of wartime reporting. What do you make of these kinds of shared, almost folkloric wartime experiences?
Well, in those high-stress environments where the line between reality and perception can get pretty blurry, these shared, almost mythical stories can provide a sense of wonder, maybe, or even just a brief escape from the harshness of war. They can become part of the shared experience, the folklore of the people who lived through it, like a collective inside joke, almost.
Steinbeck also delves into the widespread use of magic amulets and personal rituals by soldiers as a way to cope with the constant danger, the feelings of loneliness.
Right, like the Lucky Charms we talked about earlier.
Exactly. He gives examples like soldiers constantly rubbing a smooth stone in their pocket or always keeping an old Indian head penny. And he argues this isn't just about being superstitious. It fulfills a deeper human need.
A need for what?
For a tangible, almost super-personal symbol in times of extreme stress and uncertainty. Something concrete to hold on to.
The reliance on these small, personal talismans, it highlights the immense psychological burden of war and that very human need to find something to believe in, something that offers a sense of protection, a sense of control in situations where individuals feel utterly powerless.
He then explores the profound physical and psychological effects of prolonged combat, describing a kind of emotional anesthesia, even memory loss that can occur.
Yeah, the mind protecting itself.
He explains how the body and mind seem to develop these defense mechanisms during intense battle, leading to dulled senses, altered reactions, and the recurring nightmares that often follow later.
PTSD, essentially, though they didn't call it that then.
Right. He notes how even vivid memories can become strangely vague over time, almost like trying to recall childbirth or high fever, he says. It's a protective mechanism. But it's a really insightful look at the potential long-term impact of trauma.
That explanation of combat-induced anesthesia and memory loss is so crucial for understanding the often invisible wounds of war. These psychological defenses, while protective in the moment, can absolutely have significant long-term consequences for the individuals involved.
We're then introduced to the torpedo boats, nicknamed the Plywood Navy.
Ah, the PT boats. Small but mighty.
Yeah, highlighting their small size, surprising speed, but also the immense danger they faced in combat. He describes a planned attack after moonset, emphasizing the deadly potential of this swarm of small, fast vessels. What tactical advantage did these smaller boats really have?
Well, their main advantage was speed and maneuverability. They could be really difficult for larger ships to track and target.
Like mosquitoes.
Exactly. Allowing them to get in close for torpedo attacks, acting like a swarm of deadly insects against a much larger opponent.
Then there's the destroyer, which Steinbeck presents almost as the quintessential fighting ship. Beautiful, fast, undeniably gallant, he says.
I praise.
He contrasts it with the larger, maybe more cumbersome warships, and he really emphasizes the passionate possessiveness that the destroyermen felt for their own vessel, their ship.
That pride of ownership.
Yeah. He describes the quiet professionalism, the intense mutual discipline on board, and the almost instantaneous reaction when the call of action stations went out. It's almost like a heartfelt tribute to these ships and their crews.
The destroyer, in many ways, it did embody a certain romantic ideal of naval warfare, didn't it? A sleek, agile vessel crewed by highly skilled, dedicated sailors. Steinbeck really captures that sense of pride, that camaraderie, and that unwavering readiness for action.
He then introduces this rather ragged crew, 40 American paratroopers.
Okay.
Their uniforms are worn, faded, they have no insignia, which spoke volumes, Steinbeck says, about the time they had spent in the desert.
Hardened veterans.
Yeah. He notes their minimal but highly efficient equipment and their captain's quiet but firm confidence. He emphasizes the captain's insistence on personally explaining the mission to each of his men. There's a real sense of seasoned competence about them, isn't there?
Definitely. Despite their appearance, these paratroopers clearly possess that hardened professionalism, born of experience in really harsh conditions. And the captain's personal briefing, it underscores a strong sense of leadership, doesn't it? A commitment to making sure his men knew exactly what they needed to do.
We then hear about the confusing geography of Venetine's harbor, and a small whaleboat becoming quite disoriented trying to navigate its entrance.
Lost at sea, almost.
Well, lost in the harbor. Suddenly, unexpected explosions rock the place, and then this rather surreal figure appears.
Another surreal moment. What now?
A tall, gray-haired political prisoner, dressed in bright pink pajamas.
Pink pajamas.
Yes. Who speaks perfect English and conveys this surprising air of dignity amidst all the chaos. It's another one of those moments that feels almost dreamlike.
The scene at Ventatine, it's a striking example of that unexpected human element cropping up right in the middle of wartime operations. The sudden explosions, the almost theatrical appearance of this dignified prisoner in totally incongruous clothes, it creates a moment of both chaos and really poignant humanity.
There's a really touching story, too, about a wounded soldier in a hospital. He's slowly regaining the use of his injured hand.
Ah, the recovery process.
Steinbeck describes his quiet determination, his memories of his wife working back home in a plane factory, and the immense significance of 2 sudden, involuntary twitches in his previously paralyzed fingers.
Oh, wow, that's huge.
A powerful moment of hope and the body's resilience.
That small, almost imperceptible movement of the soldier's fingers, it becomes such a potent symbol, doesn't it, of the long, arduous process of healing, both physically and psychologically, after the trauma of war. It speaks to that enduring hope for recovery, for a return to a normal life.
We then meet this unforgettable character, Big Train Mulligan.
Big Train, he sounds like trouble.
Described as a master of looting, though maybe scrounging is fair, and a firm believer in the vital importance of a well-fed army.
Can't argue with that logic.
Steinbeck shares these wonderfully humorous anecdotes of Mulligan's various acquisitions, his uncanny ability to charm hostesses, his unique Georgia-Oxford style of speaking.
Georgia-Oxford? What's that?
I guess a mix of Southern drawl and maybe affected upper-class British, and his remarkable skill at avoiding promotion while always ensuring his own comfort.
A true operator.
Apparently, his current obsession when Steinbeck met him was acquiring a Scotty dog.
A Scotty dog in the middle of a war zone.
Who knows? He sounds like quite the character. Big Train Mulligan provides a much-needed dose of comic relief in the often grim narrative of war, doesn't he?
Absolutely. His resourcefulness, his somewhat unconventional approach to military life, it offers a different perspective, a perhaps more human, certainly more entertaining perspective on the wartime experience.
Steinbeck also touches on the surprising significance of chewing gum for soldiers.
Chewing gum, really?
Yeah, describing it as a valuable and enduring commodity, like a real piece of tangible property, unlike candy, which disappears quickly.
Huh. Never thought of it that way.
He recounts seeing children in England eagerly begging American soldiers for goom. It's a small detail, but it really speaks volumes about those interactions between the soldiers and the local populations.
The humble stick of chewing gum, in that context, it becomes a symbol, doesn't it? A symbol of American culture, maybe, and a valuable item in the local wartime economy, facilitating these small exchanges, these interactions between soldiers and civilians.
He briefly mentions the arrival of news regarding Mussolini's downfall.
Big news. How did the troops react?
Apparently, quite subdued. He notes their reaction was pretty muted, highlighting their primary focus on the immediate realities of their own situation rather than grand political developments far away.
Makes sense. Their world was right there, right in front of them. The troops' relatively muted response to such a significant political event, it underscores their focus on the immediate challenges. Survival, combat, not the broader geopolitical implications.
We get another one of Big Train Mulligan's tall tales.
Oh, good. More Mulligan.
This time about a seemingly saintly and incredibly lucky craps shooter named Eddie.
Saintly. A craps shooter.
Apparently. He had such incredible luck. Mulligan claims he once won a steamroller in a game.
A steamroller. Okay, Mulligan's definitely embellishing now.
Probably. But then, during a high-stakes game on a crowded troop ship, on a Sunday no less, Eddie's seemingly supernatural luck finally runs out. He rolls snake eyes or something, and he's left utterly bewildered.
Mulligan's likely embellished story of Eddie and his improbable luck. It serves as a humorous reminder, doesn't it, of the role of chance, the unexpected twists of fate, even for those who seem blessed by fortune, until they aren't.
It's also a somewhat darker story about a guy named Sligo and a young kid on a 48-hour pass in Algeria.
Okay, what happens?
Their drunken evening on the beach leads to Sligo's impulsive decision to just go AWOL. Desert.
Oh, wow. Why?
Fueled by resentment, it seems. Resentment towards those who were getting to go home, rotation ending, while the younger soldier, the kid with him, simply couldn't comprehend his actions, just watched him walk away.
That's bleak, a stark look at the disillusionment, the temptation to desert that could arise from the pressures of war. Sligo's impulsive act. It highlights the immense psychological strain of prolonged deployment and the resentment that could build up among those who felt forgotten or left behind, while others went home.
Steinbeck also explains the rather quirky tradition of the short snorter.
Short snorter? What's that?
It was among those who flew over oceans. Air crews, mostly. It apparently started as just a bit of fun, signing dollar bills or pound notes to commemorate crossing the ocean by air.
Okay.
But it gradually evolved into this serious autograph collecting phenomenon. Some airmen accumulated these long streamers of autographed currency taped together, with designated spots for important signatures, like generals or celebrities they met.
That's wild, a currency chain of autographs.
Yeah. It's a unique cultural development, born out of that shared experience of crossing large bodies of water by air during wartime.
The short snorter tradition? It's a fascinating example of how shared experiences, plus maybe a touch of playful superstition, can lead to the development of unique customs, unique social bonds within specific groups during wartime.
He then describes the vast boneyard in North Africa.
The boneyard sounds ominous.
It was a sprawling area where all the damaged, disabled military equipment was collected. Tanks, trucks, jeeps, planes, everything.
Okay, a massive scrapyard.
Well, yes and no. He explains the careful process. Inspection, tagging, and then either repairing the equipment if possible or stripping it for usable parts, cannibalizing it.
Ah, recycling on a huge scale.
Exactly. Even the unusable scrap metal was meticulously collected and sent back home to be melted down and repurposed into new equipment. It's this massive undertaking in resourcefulness, recycling on an industrial scale.
The boneyard provides such a powerful visual, doesn't it, of the sheer scale of material destruction in modern warfare, but also the equally significant effort required to salvage, to reuse resources. It highlights the incredible logistical complexities of sustaining such a massive conflict.
And finally, we come full circle, right back to that opening image.
The lieutenant with the towel.
The lone lieutenant, walking slowly up the hill with his makeshift white flag. Steinbeck narrates his internal thoughts, his fears as he walks.
Must have been terrifying.
Yeah. The unexpected encounter with just 3 young German soldiers. Their almost anticlimactic surrender. And the slightly absurd scene later at the city hall with the American captain making this understated remark about their own limited forces having taken the town. It brings the whole narrative to this rather poignant, somewhat ironic close.
That final anecdote, it perfectly encapsulates that blend of apprehension, uncertainty, and those unexpected moments of humanity that just run throughout Steinbeck's reporting.
Yeah?
The lieutenant's courageous act and the almost casual surrender that follows. It highlights the unpredictable nature of war and the human element that can sometimes just completely defy expectations.
So as we kind of come up for air from this deep dive into John Steinbeck's wartime dispatches, several key insights really resonate, I think. We've seen this constant interplay between the mundane and the extraordinary, the surprising moments of humor found amidst incredible hardship, and the enduring strength, the adaptability of the human spirit when faced with, well, unimaginable circumstances.
These seemingly small personal stories that Steinbeck captured, they offer a far richer, far more nuanced understanding of the wartime experience than any purely factual account ever could.
Definitely.
They allow you listening, to connect with the individual struggles, the individual resilience of both soldiers and civilians in a much more profound way.
And it really makes you think, doesn't it? Consider how these individual accounts challenge or perhaps broaden your own understanding of these major historical events.
Yeah.
What other unspoken stories might lie hidden within other conflicts? Or during other moments of significant societal upheaval? It's a powerful reminder, maybe, to look beyond the grand narratives sometimes, to consider the individual human experiences that truly shape our history.